So before I begin, just a little bit about Halton Food. Halton Food is a proud program of Halton Environmental Network. Our mission is to educate residents about sustainable food production and promote access to local, healthy, culturally relevant food through environmentally sustainable community garden, urban farming, and school gardens. And as you can see, we are involved in a number of initiatives, including teaching kids how to cook with the vegetables they grow. This was obviously pre-COVID times. We will hopefully be able to get back into that. And teaching people how to grow vegetables sustainably and organically and with climate change in mind. So why save seeds? One of the biggest reasons is to increase the biodiversity of a crop. So here's an example for you. Almost half the world's bananas are of the same variety. So even though there are like 1,000 different varieties grown around the world. So when you walk into any Sobeys, any Fortinos, if you go to a grocery store in the States or Europe, they're all going to be bananas of the same variety, which is pretty shocking, but those ones are used because they're easy to transport, they don't bruise as much as other ones. But unfortunately, because those are grown, because those are the market ones, they're under threat of extinction due to a fungus that is spreading throughout the banana trees. And once those are gone, those are gone. And so even though we grow all these different types of bananas, we're concentrating only one for market. So the same thing is happening with other vegetables, and we have lost over 90% of the world's different vegetable varieties. We also save seeds to promote food sovereignty. So what that means is when you have control over your own food supply, you decide what you're eating, where it comes from, and how it's grown. Of course, seeds allow you to keep the varieties that you enjoy and that have adapted to your growing conditions. I don't know if you've ever been given seeds from somebody in Ottawa, or maybe like out in the prairies or on the East Coast, and then you went and grew them in your garden. You're like, oh, that didn't work very well. Or maybe vice versa. They tried for something that you've been growing and said, oh, it didn't work very well. And that's because it's adapted to your specific growing conditions if they've been grown there for quite some time. And of course, saving seeds saves you money. So to expand on the loss of biodiversity, so Halton Food had a Halton Garden Week back in February, and we had a number of speakers, and one of them was a woman named Erin Alt from the Royal Botanical Gardens, and she talked about the loss of, her main topic was seed companies, the history of seed companies in Halton. And she was talking about all these different varieties of vegetables that we just can't get anymore. So, I mean, as you can imagine, if you look at this chart, there are really like over 460 different types of radishes, or there were, and now we're down to 27. And as you can imagine, if you were given a seed catalog, it would be the size of, I don't know if you remember those old telephone books, just full of vegetables. It's just way too big and cumbersome for people to look at. So it's narrowed down to the most popular ones. But because of that, all these seeds are lost. So, 307 different varieties of sweet corn used to be grown 100 years ago. Now we're down to 12. So it's pretty shocking what has happened to our food source. So about seed saving itself, you want to collect seeds from several different plants of the same variety, and that's to keep the genetic pool strong. If you just save from one plant, you're risking that plant being susceptible to diseases or something happening to that one plant. It's kind of like keeping that one strain of bananas. You want to collect from many different varieties of that same plant. You want to save from heirloom varieties. And so while it's possible to save hybrid varieties, the resulting plant might not look or taste like the parent plant. And I'm going to expand on that in a moment.
What about my name? Then shoot Brenda Beach.
Oh, sorry, we just might want you to mute, and that's just because the presentation is being recorded. Thank you. And always label your seeds. I know at the time you're collecting them and you're like, oh, of course I remember what this is. And yes, you might be able to tell different seeds apart. You can tell the difference between a tomato seed and a kale seed, but you might not remember the varieties. So a few months or, half a year away, we're collecting seeds now, and then back or next spring we go to plant them and you're like, Ooh, I don't really remember which one that was. And all tomato seeds look alike. So you really can't tell the difference until the plant starts growing and you get the fruit. So first, you want to know what type of plant you have. So we're going to talk just for a few moments about GMO, hybrid, heirloom, and open pollination. So GMO, genetically modified organism. So just to ease your mind, it is illegal in Canada to sell non-labeled GMO seeds. So don't worry that you went to the dollar store and you picked up seeds and you think, oh, what if these are GMO? They're not. It's illegal to sell non-labeled, unlabeled GMO seeds in Canada. So it's unlikely you're going to get this as a plant at your local nursery. You're not. The GMO, it's like big money. It's about signing those contracts. It's farmers who are growing hundreds of acres. So you're probably not going to be dealing with a GMO plant. Hybrid, I'm going to expand on that one in a moment. And I'll go on to the next one. So hybrid plants. Sometimes you'll see this on tomato seeds. And so what it is, genetics in a nutshell. So this is a very, very simplified version. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors that go into it, but just to kind of explain. So when the two parents are the same, you're going to get the same offspring. So if you have two poodles, you're going to have a baby poodle. But if you have so if there are two plants or two tomato plants are the same, you're going to get the same offspring. But what happens when the parents are different? So if you cross a poodle and a Labrador, you're going to get hybrids. So same as if you pretend that poodle is actually a tomato plant that is resistant to diseases, and your Labrador is a plant where the tomatoes taste really good, but it's not as resistant to diseases. And so a plant scientist or maybe a home gardener has crossed those two, and now you're going to look for a plant that is resistant to disease and tastes great. So that's your hybrid. But then what happens when you cross two hybrids? Well, as you know, if anybody knows anything about dogs or if you've ever seen this, when you cross a Labradoodle and a Labradoodle, well, then funny things start happening because there's a lot of genes at play. So sometimes you're getting back to it's a little more Labrador or it's a little more poodle or you're getting something else altogether. So that's why when you save seeds from hybrids, you're going to get something that might not be what the parent is. You're going to get something totally different. So heirloom, the definition of an heirloom plant is something that's been grown for over 50 years. It is something that's usually been grown for well over 50 years. And it's something that was brought from somebody's home country or has been native to here, like the squash. And open pollination, that just means it's been pollinated the way nature intended, so through insects, wind, and all those natural ways of pollinating. Sometimes it can even be with a paintbrush, so that's not as natural, but it just means that it's easily pollinated by a plant of the same variety. And though you can save seeds from those, and you can save seeds from heirlooms quite easily. So what is a seed? So this is kind of important because we'll refer back to this a few times in this presentation. So this is your typical bean seed. So the bean seed is protected by a seed coat, and that seed coat is going to protect that seed from damage. It's going to protect it from disease, and it prevents any rapid changes in moisture, because what do seeds need to germinate? They need moisture and they need warmth. So they don't need sunlight because you can plant some things really deep down in the soil and they don't need that. They need warmth and they need moisture. And that moisture penetrates that seed coat, causing the embryo to swell up and the food store to swell up and crack open, and then you get your plant coming out. So the seed coat will provide a little bit of protection. And then you have your food store. And this is the starch that's going to feed your plant until the roots can make it into the soil and bring up the nutrients from the soil. And what you're trying to do when you're keeping seeds is slow that plant's metabolism. So you want the opposite of what causes it to germinate. So you need dry and cool. Remember I said that warm and moist is going to make it germinate. So if you keep it cool and dry, you're going to prevent it from germinating. And then the embryo is obviously the baby plant. And that tiny feathery part you can see here, those are the true leaves, and everything is going to grow from that, the roots, the stem, and so on. So what do you need to get started? Buckets and containers are helpful. Paper lunch bags are helpful to keep the drying process going. Paper envelopes, usually those little coin envelopes that are 2 inches by 3 inches or 2.5 by 3, like that kind of small size are very useful. Markers or labels that don't fade or run, and that's for obvious reasons. You don't want it to fade by the time spring comes around and you can't quite make out what you wrote. A kitchen sieve, a screen, or a cheesecloth are very useful, and a fan is optional, but it is helpful. Oops. So seed saving can be easy, intermediate, or difficult. Beans and peas, for instance, are very, very easy. Something that's difficult is more things that are like in the cabbage family. Generally, seed saving can be divided into 2 categories, so your wet technique and your dry technique. So things that are easy: basil, beans, chives, dill, leaf lettuce, peas, radishes, spinach, sunflower. These are all very easy to collect the seeds. In fact, things like chives and dill, they're what I would call like the glitter in the art world. These are the glitter of the vegetable world. Once you've got it, it's really hard to get rid of them actually. So once dill goes to seed, suddenly, and it just seems to go to seed, and suddenly you've got baby dill growing everywhere. So the dry technique, this is your peas and most beans. So you're just letting it dry on the vine until the pods turn brown and brittle. If it's very close to that point, but you look at the forecast and it says it's going to rain for the next 2 weeks, or something's going to turn with the weather, just cut those vines and then leave them hanging from a ceiling or something like that to dry in a very well ventilated room. And that just keeps the air circulating so that mold and mildew and fungus don't grow on the vines. So you're just keeping it disease-free. So you're ready because the pods are very, very brittle. So you just have to, you could snap it with your hands and it would crumple very well. If it's still leathery and it's still a tough time breaking that open just with your hands, it's not dry enough. So it should crack very, very easy. And then you're just removing the pea or the bean, and you can store them in a labeled paper envelope in a cool, dry location. So there's a bean pod, almost dry. It's still a little bit leathery, so I could still bend it and it's got some flex to it, but if I bent it and it shattered, then it's perfectly dry and ready to go. Lettuce. I'm just going to talk about a few of the easy ones, and I'll talk about a few of the intermediate ones, and then 1 or 2 of the advanced. So lettuce, leaf lettuce. So before the flowers bloom, and that's when a lettuce plant blooms, it's called bolting. So before it blooms, you want to pull any of them that are bolting prematurely or have any other undesirable traits. So if you planted your lettuce in April and it bolts, it starts to flower by the end of June, that's a little early for lettuce. So that's something you probably don't want to keep, because that means it's going to keep doing that. And once something like lettuce flowers, all the sugars go into the flower instead of the leaves, and the leaves start to taste bitter. So that's why some people actually leave a little section and they say, okay, these 5 I'm going to let flower, and these other ones, these are the ones my family are going to have to eat. So you set aside the ones that you are going to harvest for seeds. With lettuce, the seed heads do not ripen all at the same time. So you want to collect them as they ripen, or you wait till about half the plant is got the flower, the seed heads, and then you just cut that stem, you put it into a paper bag to dry the rest of the way. Once collected, you want it to dry completely. So you're going to separate those seeds by breaking the seed heads, by just rolling them between your fingers or rubbing through a screen. And you want to do this outside or wearing a mask if you're going to do it inside, just because it's a lot of fine little bits and you just don't want to breathe that in. And you're just removing the stem, flowers, and leaves. So do you have to remove the stem, flowers, and leaves? No, because it does act as compost when you go to plant them again. But the problem with keeping them in is that they tend to have moisture, hold moisture a lot longer than the seeds do. And then that moisture, of course, you don't want that around your seeds. It's going to lead to mold. It's going to lead to premature germination. So that's why you remove all those little bits. And a fan is great for that, actually, as long as it's not too high where you you move everything, all your seeds and all the little separate bits of stem and flowers. So sun low, just to remove it. So here's an example. So the lettuce started to flower. So it's almost like a dandelion. So it has that little, usually yellow flower head. And then it will turn to that white, fluffy seed head. And so if I just pull those white, fluffy seeds or white, fluffy bit out on the right-hand side, you'll see the little seeds come out with it. And you can just do that individually. If you're doing a lot, that's when you would want to screen and just rub it against to get rid of more of that debris, the fluffiness, and the rest of the pod. And then you're just you're leaving the seeds more to dry, and then you're going to put them in or put them away and labeled. So these ones are quite easy. It just does take a little bit of time. So mine only started seeding, September, August. So you've got to wait the full season. So some things that are more what's considered intermediate for seed saving are beans, the fava and runner beans. So why are these ones more complicated than other beans? It's because they're insect pollinated. So it just means that you might get a little bit of cross-contamination if your neighbor's growing a different type of runner bean than you are, and then the bees going back and forth and pollinating both of them. You can get just a little bit of cross-contamination, which is going to create a hybrid, which you didn't want. You wanted to save your runner beans, right? Broccoli can be a little complicated. Corn is just, again, corn because you want to keep it separated from other corn varieties. Cucumbers, kale, and it's not terribly complicated, but it just needs 2 years before you find the seeds. So your first year, you're going to grow the kale, you leave it in the ground over the winter, it comes back the following year, and then it will start to seed. And again, those little seed pods, they look just like little beans. You wait till they're completely dry, so they're going to shatter, like if you crack them with your hands. And then you'll get lots of little tiny, they look like little tiny balls. You'll just get lots of seeds that way. And then your peppers, tomatoes, and watermelons. So tomatoes and cucumbers, you're going to save these seeds using the wet technique. And part of the reason it's more difficult for these ones is just these seeds have a jelly-like substance that surrounds the seed. And it makes the seed very slippy. And it can also prevent the seed from germinating later on. So you actually need to get rid of that jelly-like substance. So there's a simple way to do that. I wouldn't recommend it if you're going to be saving a lot of seeds just because it's cumbersome. But if you're only saving from one tomato, it's a great way to do it. It's quick, easy, done. And we'll get started with that. So simple method, you just want to rub that jelly-like substance off. You can use your fingers, paper, a cloth. Do not use paper towel because it will start sticking to it and then you'll just have a big mess on your hands. So just something that's a little rougher, that's just going to take it off. And then you just dry the seeds on a plate, store them in a cool, dry location, labeled, and you're good to go. The other way is the wet processing technique. So what you're just going to do is chop your tomato in half, scoop out the pulp and the seeds, so basically the guts of the tomato. You're just going to put that in some sort of container, anything clean, can be plastic, can be glass, doesn't really matter. And you're just going to leave that to ferment for 3 to 5 days, maybe 7 days, but at least 3 days. Mold's going to grow on the surface. That's great. Actually, that's kind of what you want it to do. It's even going to smell. That's the fermentation process. You can cover it up to reduce that odor. I leave mine outside. I get a lot of fruit flies in there, but so be it. If the seeds start to sprout, though, and that usually happens after 5 days, they can't be saved. You need to get rid of them. So that fermentation process, so here, this has been left to sit for about 5 days. You can see the mold starting to grow on top, and obviously you can't smell it through the computer, but believe me, it was getting that kind of funky smell that fermentation does. And that bacteria and the yeast involved in that process, they kill a lot of the diseases that are going to affect your future tomato plant. So that fermentation process, that actually also encourages seed germination when you're ready to plant next spring. So it's getting rid of that jelly-like substance for you. So after that 3 to 5 days, once you've had that fermentation, there's not like some magic date. You just know that it's about 3 to 5 days. It starts to smell funky. The mold's growing on top. You're going to skim off that mold off the top as much as possible without taking away the seeds, obviously. Then you're going to add lots of water, swirl it around for 10 to 20 seconds. Let this container settle. So some of your seeds are going to sink, some will float. You want to get rid of the floaters. Those are not viable seeds. You just want to leave the ones that have sunk. You're going to scoop all that top junk out, all the floaters, all the stuff that rose to the top, and then you're going to strain. You might have to do this a couple of times, and that's perfectly fine. And the seeds are quite durable, so you can be a little rough with them. So you can scrape that against that metal sieve or plastic sieve or whatever you have. They're not going to break apart. So I'm not saying like you have to crush them with all your might, but if you just use, firm pressure and you rub it back and forth, it helps to get rid of all that extra debris. And then you're just going to rinse it to get rid of any mold or bacteria or anything else that's on there. Then you're going to dry the seeds. Don't rush this step. I did this last summer, not rushed it. I was saving tomato seeds, and it took 2 weeks actually for them to dry on the plate. So I just laid them on a plate. Do not leave them in the sun. Not that that's a bad thing, but you're leaving them now out in the open, so that means birds can get at them and all the rest of it. So I just left it in an area that was well ventilated inside, and it's away from sources of heat. If you do it too quickly, if you rush this step, the seed may shrink and crack. So that's going to damage your seeds. You want to kind of mix it around every couple of days just to let all the sides dry. Once the seeds are dry, you're going to store them in an airtight container. If you're saving from many different varieties, put each variety in a separate envelope, well labeled, of course, and then store in an airtight mason jar. If you store in a very cool, dark place, seeds can last up to 5 years. So there it is in a nutshell, just so you can see it all at once. So you're just scooping it out, putting it in a cup, letting it ferment for 3 to 5 days until you get that fermentation process going. Add some water, swirl it around, let it settle. Remove the stuff that's on the top, put it through the sieve, and then let it dry. So you're cleaning it up and then letting it dry. So peppers can be self-pollinated, but they can also be insect-pollinated. Usually they're self-pollinated, but it's not unheard of to be insect-pollinated. So that means it would need to be kept separate from other plants of the same type. So other hot peppers would need to be separated. Like if you're growing hot peppers and saving the hot peppers, keep them apart from other hot peppers. Same as if you're doing that sweet peppers, just to prevent the cross-contamination. So just to go back, the tomatoes are actually self-pollinated, so you don't have to worry about that step for this one. You're letting your peppers ripen fully. So green peppers, although they're edible for us, they're not ripe. You need to wait until they've changed their color. You just, once they've changed the color and they become almost a little bit mushy and sunken in on the vine, take your pepper, slice it open, remove the seeds, let it dry in an open spot, and you're ready to go. If you are saving seeds from hot peppers, just be very careful. You're dealing with a lot of hot peppers probably all at once, so you might want to wear gloves. Certainly don't start rubbing your eyes when you're in the middle of all this. So there, my jalapenos, the one on the left is the one I would eat, the green one. I've let the one on the right, you can't tell, but it's very soft. It's been left on the vine for a very long time. I would just slice that open, remove the seeds, let them dry, and they're good to go. So something that would be advanced seed saving would be sugar beets, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, and celery. So I'll just talk about carrots. Carrots are a biennial, which means they take 2 years to complete their life cycle. So on the second year, that's when they flower. So you don't want to save seeds from carrots that are flowering the first year, because that's what I talked about before. That's flowering far too early. That means it's going to continue to do that. You're not saving a good product. What's going to happen is that the energy goes into the flowers and not the root, and so it's not going to be as sweet as you want. The big thing with carrots is that they need to be kept isolated from other carrot varieties. So if your neighbor's growing carrots on the other side of the fence, they're going to cross-contaminate. And they can cross-contaminate with wild carrots, which you might know as Queen's Anne's lace, and they can cross-contaminate with dill. So then you're going to get something very inedible if they cross with that wild carrot or the dill. So you just want to, and that's the big thing. That's why it's complicated to save carrot seeds. So you just have to keep them separated, which can be quite hard to do because the pollen can travel by insect up to 400 meters, which is quite a way. The best practice is actually digging your carrots up in the late fall, early winter, before the ground freezes, obviously, and then you're replanting it back in the spring very carefully, isolating it from other carrots, and then it should start to flower. When it does, you're cutting off the flower head when it's turned brown and dry. You're going to place that in a paper bag and then let it dry further. So there is what that looks like. As you can tell, that looks very much like Queen's Anne's lace, that weed you find at the side of roadsides. The seeds are fuzzy, which commercial producers get rid of that fuzziness, so you don't see that. So that might be, if you're ever collecting by yourself, and you're like, ooh, I don't know if this looks right because it does not look like the package I got. That's why they do come fuzzy, and the commercial producers just get rid of that for you, just to make it a little easier to handle. But for instance, again, same type of flower. This is a dry dill seed head, and you know, it's the same thing. That's why it's same family. So that's why it's going to cross-contaminate. So things to consider when you're saving seeds. How is the plant pollinated? Is it by wind, insect, or self? If it's self-pollinated, that means it's like the tomato plants. It's very easy to collect the seeds. If it's wind or insect, that's when you need to start thinking, well, is it going to cross-contaminate with somebody's plants that's nearby or my own? Did I grow many lettuce of the same variety and now they're going to cross-contaminate? You want to make sure your vegetable or fruit is fully mature. Mature seeds are more likely to be viable, so germinate the next year, and they will store longer. Do not keep seeds from plants that have a disease. So this disease may remain on the seeds. It is also likely that that plant is susceptible to that disease, which means every time you plant that tomato plant, it's going to keep coming down with that disease. So always choose from your healthiest plants. Don't keep seeds from plants that don't behave as they should. So this is what I mentioned before, like if it flowered too early, or if it grew and it didn't look the type that you wanted it to, don't save those seeds. And save seeds from varieties you enjoy. Can be a lot of effort to save seeds from varieties that you're just ho-hum about. So, you know, put the effort into ones that you really want to save. So storing seeds, cold and dry is best. It's just like a bear hibernating, right? You don't want it to eat its food store. So keep it cold, keep it dry. That'll keep the seeds dormant. If you have to choose between one or the other, dry is more important than cold. Make sure the seeds are dry before you store them. So that's when you can use that fan we talked about earlier. And use an airtight jar. Glass is impenetrable to water, much more so than plastic. And of course, it's going to keep mice out. So let's say you saved your seeds, or you were given seeds, or you went to a seedy Saturday, seedy Sunday, and then you forgot about them, or you're like me, you save the seeds and then you put them in the shed, and then next spring you're like, oh, I forgot I saved those. And you're thinking, well, are they still viable? Are they still going to be good? So you can just do a germination test. So you're just going to take 10 or 20, really it just depends on how many seeds you saved. Obviously you don't want to use them all up, so you're just taking a small percentage of. The more you test, the more accurate the results are, but of course, don't use all your seeds just on a test. So save 10 or 20 and use a pot of sterile soil and plant them up, or use blotting paper. So this is, some people say paper towel, but that tends to get a little too wet. You want that cheap brown stuff that you find in restrooms, right? You're just laying it on, keeping it nice and moist, rolling it up, and then you're trying to mimic the conditions that your plant would normally need to germinate. So hot peppers, for instance, it will not germinate below 21 degrees. Actually, 25 is more optimal for it. So if you try to germinate pepper seeds at 15 degrees, and you're not successful, you might think, oh, these are all bad and throw them out, but really you just weren't keeping them in the conditions that they need to germinate. So same with lettuce. If you kept it too warm, lettuce really needs cool temperatures to germinate. You might skew your results that way. Make sure that paper or soil, whatever you're using your test with, is evenly moist, not too wet, but obviously don't let it dry out either. And then to get the germination rate, it's just a simple math. And so if 17 out of your 20 seeds germinated, divide 17 into 20, you get 85 or 0.85 times by 100 to get a percentage, 85%. About. Obviously, the more you test, the more accurate that is. And the less you test, the less accurate. So resources, obviously contact Halton Food, www.haltonfood.ca if you have any questions about seed saving. We're on Instagram at halton.food. We're on Facebook and Twitter at Halton Food. Seeds of Diversity is an excellent resource, www.seeds.ca. This book, How to Save Your Own Seeds, is excellent. I believe it's around $15. It might have gone up a little bit. Great resource. It tells you how to save pretty much every seed imaginable, and a lot of tips and advice on that as well. So thank you. Any questions? Oh. Susie, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then you can go ahead.
Yeah, when you were saying keep the seeds cool, you mentioned having them in the shed so they can be outdoors in winter and freeze. It's not a matter of keeping them like indoors, non-freezing.
Well, best practice is actually to keep them in a basement or a cold cellar or your garage. I was kind of saying shed because that's where I always forget my seeds, so that's not best practice. Just because it's not bad to let them freeze. It's not going to hurt them unless they weren't perfectly dry. So if they weren't perfectly dry and there's a little bit of moisture still left inside that seed, the freeze thaw could actually break apart that seed and destroy it. So best practice is somewhere that's going to be consistent temperature throughout. So a shed's not perfect because, we have these crazy winters where suddenly it's -20 and then it's +10 and as long as it doesn't leak your shed and the humidity's low, it's not bad. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay. And are we going to get a copy of the presentation? Yes, the library has recorded this presentation. It will be posted to their YouTube channel. That will be shortly. They have to do a little bit of editing first. And the last slide, yes, I will share this again. Oh, and go back. There's all the resources. And now I can't see the chat, unfortunately. So Annie, if there's any more questions.
There was something, and then when I looked there, I couldn't see anything. Okay, it's the same question about the recording, copy of the presentation.
So is everybody thinking about saving your seeds? So, when I say best practices, I'll be honest with you, seeds are more resilient than you think they are. So I was given tomato seeds, I don't know, so this was a few years ago. I was given tomato seeds, I was all excited, I was going to plant them, and then obviously in another location, I had them in my car, forgot about them, and then they, started heating up, it got into summer, the temperature was just wildly, something 40 degrees, and my car was however much they say it rises by, right? So suddenly it's probably like 80 degrees in there. And then it got cool at night and on, up and down, up and down. And I forgot about them all summer in my car. And I thought, oh, they're done for, whatever. And there was only 6 seeds in this little package. But I thought, you know what? I'll give it a go. I'll plant them. So I actually had a 50% germination rate. So I potted up all 6, 3 of them grew, and I had 3 tomato plants out of that. So don't give up, and especially you'll see seed packets with an expiration date on them, or you might think, oh, I've had these seeds for a while. The germination rate will be lower, but it won't necessarily be 0. So give it a shot, right? Like the worst you've done is a little bit of time, maybe a little bit of soil. Like if you were growing tomato seeds anyway, so you're putting the effort into the grow lights, all the rest of it. So I would say give it a go. Don't give up on seeds just because you've suddenly found them somewhere and you think, oh, maybe they won't work anymore.
Okay, Jennifer has her hand up.
Yes, I just had a question, just a general comment. So as somebody who's thinking about growing vegetables, I'm sort of just doing flowers and plants now, but maybe want to sort of get started in growing vegetables. Is there a specific vegetable that you suggest we start with that's easier to plant and as well as harvest the seeds afterwards?
Peas are very, very easy. And the great thing about peas is that you can never really plant those too early. As soon as the ground is workable, get them in. They seem to know when to come up. So you can pop those in the ground and then suddenly we get a terrible frost or we get, another inch of snow. Well, they just hang out in the soil and then they come up later. They like it cool. They know when to come up. So peas are very easy to grow. And they're super easy to harvest the seeds. You just leave a few on the vines. You harvest as much as you want during the season, leave a couple on, and you just wait until that pod gets nice and brittle, and then just harvest them. And you don't even have to harvest that many before you've got 20 seeds. And I mean, how many did you want to plant anyway, right? So I would start with peas or beans. Beans are another easy one, that sort of thing, that dry technique.
Okay, thanks very much.
Somebody's asking a question, Helen, about if is there a seed exchange in the Halton region where heritage varieties can be exchanged or purchased?
Absolutely. So we are doing, Halton Food is doing another CD Sunday this year. So hopefully we won't have any restrictions. This usually is early spring. That's when you're going to look for your CD Sunday events. Keep going to the Halton Food website. Lots of advertising as we get closer. Follow us on social media. You will see a lot of advertising for it as we get closer to the date. Hopefully we're all allowed to meet in person to do the exchange. This year, February, we obviously didn't get a chance to meet in person to do an exchange, but we did have a whole garden week where we had so many speakers about so many great topics when it came to gardening. So we had University of Guelph professors talk about how to grow plants in space, and we had lovely talks by the Oakville Public Library. They did some readings for kids, so we had for every age bracket. So it's a great week. We might just go back down to the one CD Sunday where we'll have different booths with people with different seed vendors, and we also have a seed exchange. So you can bring your seeds or you can purchase seeds.
Okay. I've got a couple of comments. I may say them. Thanks for the tips, wet processing technique. We'll definitely try it, is what somebody said. And somebody else said, great presentation. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Does anybody have any seeds that they're thinking about trying and you want some tips, or has anybody saved any seeds? I'd like to know anybody's experiences.
Well, unmute yourself if you speak. Remember to unmute, please.
I should just also mention that the Oakville Public Library has a seed library. So you can come and get seeds and exchange seeds. So I'm not sure specifically when we launch it. I think it's
in the spring.
In the spring.
Yeah.
So you can come to the library and get variety of seeds and try that way.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering about that book that Helen mentioned, Save.
Yeah, Save Your Seeds by Seeds of Diversity.
Yeah,
How to Save Your Own Seeds by Seeds of Diversity.
yeah. We
Mhm.
might have you know, you're all Halton residents. You might want to check out that book in your library. It might be available. And Susie Bell has her hand up.
The taste of a tomato that tastes like a tomato is only a distant memory. My son tried to grow some plants this year that were from someone he knows, great-grandfather, tomatoes brought from Europe. They're still not red, but I'm just wondering where you can get tomatoes that taste like tomatoes. And you mentioned heirloom, and I've tried heirlooms from farmers markets and they still don't taste great. I know some of the issue is so many things are being grown in hothouses, which degrades taste and nutritional value. So anyways, for someone who wants to taste the tomatoes that were growing at home as a kid, you know, that those meaty, not watery, where can you turn for seeds?
So I don't know if she sells seeds, but there is a woman down Niagara Way who grows over 400 different varieties of heirloom tomato plants. So I'm sure you'll find one that's going to taste how you want it to taste. She grows, you know, the green, zebra striped, the yellow, the red, the orange, the black ones, like everything you can imagine. She is a tree and twig, or the tree and twig, or twig and tree, tree and twig. Yeah, there. Andrea wrote it in the chat room. HTTP treeandtwig.squarespace.com. So look her up. In the early spring, she starts to promote her stuff then. Her name is Linda, and she does sell seeds, and she does sell the plants. So you might want to check her out. The other thing is just to Google heirloom seeds and see who's selling them. And then Halton Food. Yeah, last year we usually we have an exchange with her that we get some of the plants, and then we'll bring in some of them for distribution up here because she's down in Niagara Way. So it's a good hour from Oakville. But great tomatoes. I usually buy from her every year. I know what you mean. Like when you get them from, I do not buy tomatoes in the winter from the grocery store because they're absolutely tasteless. And I just love the ones that I grow in my garden in the summer. And half of them are from her. So I do know what you mean.
Thanks.
Annie, you were mentioning something that was jogging my mind before. Oh, yes, sorry. It was Jennifer about the seed library. That it's an excellent resource. I highly recommend everybody check it out. It's just like checking out a book. You can check out some seeds, grow them up for the summer, and then you can save some seeds and return them in the fall. But it's a great resource. And they're expanding. There's a lot of variety. We did some, so I was helping out with the garden where I had a gentleman he used some of the seeds that were from the Oakville Public Library. I think we did runner beans and we did string beans. I want to say there was something else in there too. I think he started pepper seeds there from the seeds from the library. So great resource.
Yeah.
So it's not hard to save your own seeds. It's kind of fun. And you get to say that you've held them year after year. It's a great thing to try. And I always say, like, just try it, because what's the worst that happens? That, okay, it didn't work. Then, a little bit of time on your part, but you know, as long as you're not trying something terribly complicated to begin with, try something that readily self-seeds. The kale, like it almost becomes a weed your second year if you let it seed. Those little seed pods just kind of crack open on their own, and suddenly your whole garden's full of kale. So they're very easy to save seeds from. The tomatoes they're not hard. It just takes, you know, a few weeks to get straight to the to get to the dried seed. So from start to finish would be about 3 weeks.
In the chat, it says, and we will be bringing in some of her crops for distribution. I can't see who posted that. Is that the library or Halton Food?
Halton Food.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So it's a great way to follow us on social media so you know when that's going to happen, and check out our website.
Are you volunteers?
We're a nonprofit organization. Under the Halton Environmental Network. So we teach people about climate change, and our Halton Food specifically teaches people about climate change and gardening.
Oh, okay. Sounds interesting.
Yes, we're trying to get everybody growing and growing their own food sustainably.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, please get in touch if you have any questions, or if you're starting the process and you're like, oh, I'm not sure this is going well. Drop us a line, help you out.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Helen, for this wonderful presentation. I hope we will be having lots of seeds and vegetables next summer. Yeah.